Hello, hello, everyone. It's been a while, probably, since you heard me, unless you're listening to old videos or anything. I didn't do any extra videos other than the one that I posted with my analysis last Sunday. And I'm sorry about that. It got to be kind of a busy week, but I also didn't actually have that many asks in my inbox. I mean, I have a few that I haven't done, but only like 4 or 5. So, unlike the previous week where I had like 35. So I didn't worry too much about doing extra videos. We had a lot to unpack in that video from Sunday, and I just decided to kind of let that lie. This week is actually not going to be terribly different. I mean, I don't know if I'll get around to more videos. I will try, but I just mean in terms of the analysis. I was not entirely sure what to expect from episode 5. I mean, we had the previews for it and, kind of know some of the scenes that'll be there, but most of the spoiler clips that I watched were in episodes 4 and 6. So I don't even know if I watched any from this episode. So I was going, okay, well, we'll see what this episode brings us, and it definitely was a little more low key. We had some big stuff going down in episode 4. Janae's death, Isabel's death, there was a lot going on. But surprisingly, this had a lot too. I was pleasantly surprised by how much great stuff was in this episode, and much like the last episode, there is a ton of Beth symbolism in this, like tons. And I was like, wow, I thought it would be more one of those like low-key bridge episodes, and it kind of was in some ways in terms of action, but there was some action in this episode too. So anyway, let's just get started and I will tell you what I saw. We're going to hope that this episode is not quite as long as last week's, but we're also just not going to not talk about stuff. So we'll just do the best we can. So, all right. We start with actually a pretty big symbol, which is Daryl and Carol trying to get their car restarted, but it's fried. And fried definitely suggests that it's a battery issue. So we have a car without a battery that's dead. And Daryl looking very sad in the front seat. Obviously, we can link that back to Beth in a lot of ways, especially because there's the car that had the dead battery that Carol tried to leave with, and that's the car they end up going to Atlanta with to look for Beth. In this case, I mean, obviously he's feeling sad about Isabel. So the fact that the battery is dead and they aren't able to revive it, that's not really a resurrection symbol. That's just a death symbol. So really, I do think this was kind of about Isabel, but it also reinforces the symbolism we've seen in the past. And, the symbol where there is a dead car, like the battery's dead, but they find a little bit of juice in a battery in the trunk, and that revives it. You see how that's very much a resurrection symbol. And of course, we saw Beth in the trunk more than once. So it all works, Anyway, so they ditch the car. We see that Vouloir did take Laurent back to the rooftop community in Paris, which we probably figured he would. And we see him talking to somebody about what happened at the nest. And I really like Vouloir. He's just got a really good head on his shoulders. Then Caudron arrives, and I'm loving Caudron here. I really am. He was one of a few, villains in the first season, but I'm really liking his redemption arc here. And anyway, I wish we could see more of him. I seriously doubt he's going to go to Spain with Daryl and Carol, but I really like his character. I kind of wish we could see a little bit more story with him. Anyway, Vouloir doesn't trust him, but Laurent explains that Caudron helped save them. Meanwhile, Daryl and Carol get to the racetrack, and she kind of lets on a little bit to Daryl that she lied to Ash, but she doesn't get into too much detail. Ash has been busy setting up traps and everything. I mean, I think the biggest thing this reminded me of was Claire and Morgan. I was thinking that it could be a little bit of a Beth parallel specifically to the 17 days, because even though it's not a car, it's the racetrack, but he's enclosed it, using roofing and that sort of thing. And then when they get inside expecting to find him, he's not there. But there are walkers because they've gotten caught on his traps. There are some people that are dead. And there's one that just hasn't died yet, which he asks Daryl to kill him, and Daryl does. So it felt a little bit like going to search for Beth and not having her body there. But in terms of the traps, like these swinging hammers and things like that, and tripwires, that's very much like Morgan and Coda. And that's interesting. I'm not even sure exactly how to articulate how that might tie in, but so many of us over the years have wondered if Morgan had something to do with Beth's body disappearing. We don't have any particular evidence for that in the show, other than the kind of strange entanglement of symbolism. So I just thought that was interesting, that there were some callbacks to Morgan and Clear. But the point is, Ash is not there. They don't know where he is. So we do learn that those two guys, they had come looking for the plane, and he said something about taking the supplies. Then the next thing it cuts to is Ash running around, and we don't really know where he is or what happened. And actually, as the episode ends, we still kind of don't. I'm not sure that it actually gives us an explanation of why he left the racetrack and ended up where he did. I'll have to think about that some more. Anyway, we see him running from walkers, and he gets into the van, and he is surrounded by them, and he tries to knock one of the walkers back from his door, and then two of them slam into the door, and it hits him in the head. And of course, the first thing I noticed was that he ended up with a cut on his head, on the left side of his forehead, exactly where Beth got shot. Exactly. Okay? Not a coincidence, people. And he's in the front seat of a car that is surrounded by walkers. Huge, huge Beth playback right here. Okay? Carol then later says, this is a little out of order, but just to jump to it real fast, Carol later says he probably has a concussion, which is what Dr. Edwards said about Beth in Slabtown, is that she had a head injury. Personally, I'm not sure I believe she had a head injury. I mean, maybe. But whether she did or not, the only reason I say that is because of the suspicious drugs they were giving her that you would never give anybody who had a head injury. But then again, if it's all part of the bite cure theory. If they were trying to save her from a bite, then maybe you would give them to her even if she had a head injury, because it's like, well, yeah, that's really dangerous to give someone. It's the heparin. The heparin's a blood thinner, so you would never give that to anyone who had a head injury because that could encourage bleeding on the brain. So you just wouldn't do that. But if she's got a bite that they're trying to save her from and she's going to die anyway from the bite, then it probably wouldn't matter. Anyway. But just because of all the suspiciousness around the medical jargon they were using, I've always gone, but did she really have a head injury, or did he just tell her that? Anyway. But it doesn't really matter, because either way, they said that about Beth at Slabtown, and she says that about Ash here, so that's just another parallel. So we kind of leave Ash there in the van, and then Daryl and Carol go to where Vouloir is, and just before that, Caudron is talking about, I think he's talking to Laurent, actually, and about how everyone he ever wanted to protect is dead, and that played a big part in him switching sides, But then Daryl and Carol arrive, and we get this, like a little reunion between Daryl and Laurent, which is great, and Laurent meets Carol. But then, of course, Daryl has to tell Laurent about Isabelle. So we have this scene where they're kind of in Laurent's room and they're talking, and there's a lot of interesting things going on here. There's a lot of interesting symbols. The patterns on the windows and even on his blanket are checkered, very close to diamond patterns. We also notice there's a very obvious inclusion of Laurent's shoes sitting by the bed, and I wasn't entirely sure what to make of that, but W.D. Way came up with a really great interpretation, and I really like it. I think she's right. It's just that, obviously, the lost foot or lost shoe symbolism is something we've talked a lot about. It's usually just one, and it signifies that there's going to be a separation between people for a long time. So we had one right before Rick disappeared. Rick and Michonne were going to be separated. Of course, we saw the one shoe by Beth in Inmates, which wasn't too long before she and Daryl were separated. And we saw it with, like, Al and Isabel in Fear the Walking Dead. It's symbol that they use a lot. So she suggested that seeing both of them together shows that someone's going to come back together pretty soon. And, of course, in this episode, in a very small way, it was kind of a Daryl and Laurent reunion, so it could refer to them since they were Laurent's shoes. But in a bigger way, obviously, we think it means that the separation between Daryl and Beth is going to be ending soon. And this episode replayed so many things from season 4 and season 5. I'll get to it later in the episode, but this is the biggest replay of Consumed that I've seen so far. So anyway, we really liked this particular scene, right? It was very sad. Laurent says that Isabel loved Daryl, that she told him that. We didn't actually see that, I don't think, but Daryl gets very teary-eyed about that. And then he has the line that we kind of saw in the trailer, the original trailer, where he says that he wants Laurent to come back to America. And Laurent says no. I was kind of surprised by that. I didn't expect Laurent to say no, but he says that he should stay there because he has friends and he's comfortable there. It's different because he feels at peace and he's happy. And Daryl should just leave and go back to where he wants to be with his family. And Daryl's, kind of says, are you sure? And he says, yeah. And I mean, I kind of felt bad for Daryl. I think he felt a little bit rejected by Laurent at that point. But interestingly, when Laurent turns over and goes to bed, he's crying. So obviously there's more going on there than what's being said, right? So the next morning we see Carol walking around the community. She's obviously kind of impressed with this community. And she does see a young woman who looks a lot like Sophia, who's wearing similar clothes. So the Sophia demons are still alive and well for Carol. This is also the part where Carol walks up behind Daryl and she's a little bit blurry at first because it's focused on him in the foreground. So just a couple of things about this that I wanted to say. When we saw this in the trailer, they made it seem like this was her coming up behind him and he didn't know that it was her, like this would be their reunion. And this was a long time ago. And the first thing that I said is there's no way that's their reunion. The way that they've showed other things and just looking at the trailer in different scenes, that can't possibly be their reunion, right? And we were right about that because obviously they reunited last episode. I even wondered, though, if because of the way they showed it, it was just kind of suspicious, and I wondered if she was even going to be blurry in that shot. Now, she was, so I was a little bit wrong about that. But they made it seem like this was some sort of really big deal scene, and it actually kind of was, but probably not in the way most people would have thought. Like, again, because most people were thinking this was going to be the scene of the big reunion between them. Because, and I mean, understandably so, that's what it made it look like in the trailer, but if you kind of dig a little deeper and put things together logically, and we all know that they sometimes tend to splice things together in the trailer that are a little bit misleading, right? And it's just for the sake of getting a message across in the trailer. Anyway, but because of that, I was kind of paying close attention to the scene, because while I, even back at the trailer, didn't think it was going to be some major reunion, or, even it didn't really look like they were in the middle of some big action or anything like that, it could have been a hint that what's going on here is important. And I do think it was. But on a very, more of an internal, emotional, very subtle kind of level. So what's going on here is the two of them actually have one of the best heart-to-hearts they've probably ever had. And they have a couple of them in this episode. And this is very much the writers trying to show us those internal arcs that I've talked about, for the last month or so that are going on. But I really, really liked this conversation because it's so on the nose with what's going on internally here. So, let's see. Carol wants him to talk about the fact that Laurent doesn't want to go with him. She can tell that he's upset about that, right? And he says he doesn't want to talk about it, of course. And she's like, okay, well, I'm going to talk about it then. So she kind of forces him to. And she says, look, he doesn't want to go. That sucks. I get it, but it just is what it is. And he says, I let him down, so I can't blame him. All right, so here we go. We're finally getting Daryl admitting kind of his limiting beliefs here, and the fact that anytime something goes wrong, something bad happens, certainly anytime somebody dies, he feels like he let somebody down, even if there was no way he could have ever done anything about that. Obviously it was not his fault, and everybody's doing the best they can, and tragedies happen. It's The Walking Dead. It's the zombie apocalypse, But he feels like he deserves to be alone because he's let people down. And Carol kind of gets after him for that, and she says, so he's getting back at you? Is that what you're saying? And he goes, well, I deserve it. I'm here, she's not, right? Okay, not only does this obviously apply to Isabel, who he's talking about, but this could be a conversation about Beth. If he had a conversation with anyone about Beth back in season 5, it would have gone like this, okay? But he was not as in tune with his feelings back then as he is now. So I don't know that he was really even capable of having this conversation back then. You know, if you think back to them, which was 5'10", and Carol's like following him around every time he leaves the group to look for water, it was because she knew he was in pain and she was trying to get him to talk about it, but he just was not in a place where he could talk about it. But here he is, and she actually is getting him to talk about it. And Carol says, you know, I get it. So now you're replaying every decision, thinking of everything you could have done differently. And he says, that's a long list. And she says, yeah, for you and me both. And the past just becomes one big giant hole of what ifs. And then Daryl says, why us? Why did we get so far? And Carol says, luck. And he goes, yeah, bad luck, maybe. And she says, it's kind of hard to tell the difference. So honestly, guys, I could go on and on for like every single one of these lines, but I'm going to try to keep this relatively short. So part of this is Carol. This is also Carol's internal arc. And I don't know if I ever found it for you. I'll try to find it for you a long time ago. I might have linked it in the show notes to the video I did a few weeks ago about the internal arcs and how they laid out Beth's return for us using Diverged. But several years ago, I did a written meta on Daryl and Carol's arc and how they have the exact same internal arc. And it obviously pertains to different outward things. You know, obviously for Carol, it's Sophia. For Daryl, for Carol, it's all the kids. So it's mostly Sophia, but it's also Lizzie and Mika. It's also Henry, you know. For Daryl, it's Merle, Beth, now Isabel, Glenn, right? But they do the same things, you know, and so that's why she can relate to him so well here. And so when she says, now you're replaying every decision, thinking of everything you could have done differently, she does that too. He does that for sure. Both of them do. And so what she's saying here applies to everything since Sophia for her. So this is both of them talking about their internal arcs. And that's why I think this is so powerful. Let's see. It's a long list. The past becomes one big giant hole of what ifs. So it's just regrets that you have to let go of or they're going to eat you alive, right? Which is something Beth also said to Daryl, right? You got to, what did she say? You got to let it go or it's going to kill you. That's something we actually don't talk about very much as a foreshadow of Daryl's arc, but it was. Put it away. That's what she said. You've got to put it away. I knew I wasn't saying that right. Anyway, and then we've got this luck thing. I've talked about the luck symbolism for a long time, mostly because Beth says it at Grady. She tells Edwards he's lucky. And the thing that I picked up on is very often it said, it's almost got an edge of sarcasm to it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the character is saying it sarcastically. I don't think Beth was being sarcastic when she said that to Edwards, but Rick said something similar to Spencer at Alexandria before he died, and it's like they're saying that these are people who don't know how to survive, don't know how to take care of themselves. So from a logical standpoint, they shouldn't have survived as long as they did, but they were lucky enough to find either a group or a place or a situation that allowed them to survive for a long time, even if they're not survivors. And I don't know that they're using it quite the same way here, but they might be. I mean, maybe they're just saying, you know, we were lucky enough to find people to help us survive. And then he says bad luck. And what that is a callback to really is his line to Beth about, well, I mean, it's kind of an indirect thing, I guess, in Still when they're on the porch and she says he's going to be the last man standing and he gets upset about that and says, you're not a happy drunk at all, because he doesn't want to be the last man standing. He doesn't want to be alone. And so I think that's kind of similar to what he's saying here, is she's saying, I guess it was luck that we survived. And he's saying, well, maybe it's bad luck because we keep out surviving all these people that we care about, right? And then she says it's kind of hard to tell the difference. So, I mean, I could probably deep dive into this conversation and start connecting all kinds of things from previous episodes. I'm not going to do that, but I think it was a really important conversation in terms of their internal arcs. So I was like writing notes as fast as I could at that part. Oh, I do have one other note that I missed here about Daryl telling Laurent about Isabel, and that is simply that it reminded me a little bit of him telling Beth about Zach. You know, he took him to another room and gave him the bad news that Isabel had died, and then they talked for a minute. So it was a little bit of a reminder of that. And Laurent is still a really big Beth proxy here, so that totally works. All right, so then Vouloir shows up, and they start talking about where they're going to go look for Ash, and he suggests they go back to the club. And I thought the scene where they went to the club was actually really entertaining. I mean, it's kind of old school to Daryl now. He's kind of used to it. He's still not really comfortable there, but he doesn't, think too much of it. But Carol was all acting scandalized and shocked and everything. I just thought it was entertaining. Clearly, okay, Anna is in charge now, and she's raided the Maison Mère. We know that because she has the Mona Lisa. And also, they have some of Ash's ethanol. So when Carol sees it, then they know that Ash must have gone to the Maison Mère, and they go there to look for him. And again, I'm not sure why he ended up there. Maybe they'll tell us at some point. Maybe it's just a matter of, the people tried to break in, and he ran, and he went there looking for Carol or something. That could be. But we're not really told how he got there, which is actually kind of interesting. But I'll come back to that in just a minute. So then we go back to the community. Caudron is picking and eating strawberries, of all things. Strawberries, remember, are a huge Beth symbol. Huge. And I think, the biggest reason that we always saw them as a Beth symbol, first of all, there's an official card, one of the trading cards, that is kind of about that, for one thing. So it's not even just us making that up, right? But remember that in the end of season 4, we see Daryl pick up a strawberry bush and say claimed. It's when he's with the claimers. But then Beth also is dealing with strawberries at Grady. She's using them. We see them in the cafeteria, and then she uses them to get Percy to help her with something. And so we've always seen it as a Beth symbol. I think that there's kind of a deeper meaning. It's not just inherently a Beth symbol, but it's about deciding, really, I think it's about deciding who you're going to be and like who you're going to be with in a lot of ways. Just making choices about your life. But the point is, we saw them very, very heavily around Beth and Daryl, especially in season 4. I know that we saw them around Father Gabriel in season 5 too, and that was entangled with a lot of Beth symbolism. But that's what I mean. They gave him strawberries, Father Gabriel, to welcome him to Alexandria, and then for a minute there in season 5, he was not being loyal to Rick and that group. But then eventually, obviously, he came around and became very loyal to them. So it's kind of an interesting symbol, and I think we need to sort of deep dive into it to get a little bit more understanding about what it means. But the fact that Caudron was eating strawberries here was a big deal. And remember that Caudron is missing an eye, so he is a Sirius character now, Sirius, right? He's part of the Sirius symbolism, and he's eating strawberries. That's huge. Then, on top of that, and again, back to why I really liked him in this episode, he starts talking about faith, right? So he has this conversation with Laurent, and Laurent asks why originally Caudron wanted to kill Daryl, and he says, well, he killed my brother, and I was very angry about that. And he says, anger is a disease. It makes you do terrible things. And then Laurent talks about fear and how fear does the same thing. And Caudron has basically found God. He says that for the first time after all of this happened, he started feeling like there was a God and somebody was watching him to see what he would do. I thought that was really, really interesting. And it kind of gives us some insight into like maybe what was going on in Caudron's head while Janae was torturing him, and what he was thinking about. And I just think that's really, really interesting. He does say that he wants to beg Laurent's forgiveness for what was done to him. And Laurent says, I already forgave you, but basically you need to forgive yourself. So it's a whole conversation about faith and forgiving yourself for things, which does also tie back to Daryl and Carol's conversation, the whole internal arc. They need to stop beating themselves up about what they cannot change and forgive themselves for things that, again, they just really couldn't have done anything about, even if it was due to a decision they made, they still didn't make that decision in order to hurt somebody, right? Everybody just does the best that they can. So you can see that this forgive yourself and let go of these past regrets and move forward in faith is like the whole theme that's going on here. And again, very important that right before Caudron has this conversation about faith, he is eating strawberries and he's a serious character. All right. So then Losang and his people arrive with guns, and Caudron instantly goes into protective mode around Laurent and helps to hide him. Then we cut to Daryl and Carol getting to Maison Mare, and they're in a yellow Jeep. The yellow is very important here because of the color. Obviously, we have Beth's yellow polo, but yellow does seem to be the color that represents escape, especially escape from death in The Walking Dead. Now, obviously, because Beth was wearing her yellow polo, that's one of the reasons, among many, many, many others, that we believe she escaped from death in Coda. But we see it other places, too. When Rick in, 7/12, when him and Michonne are at the carnival and everything, and he falls into the group of walkers, and for about 2 minutes she thought he just died. He comes out of a yellow car. It's not a vehicle car. It's a like a ride car on the Ferris wheel. There's a yellow ride car, and he somehow slips in there, and that's how he gets away from the walkers and comes out of it. And he's fine. And of course that was a foreshadow of him being taken into the CRM and Michonne thinking he had died, and then them being reunited, right? It was like a very they call that a synecdoche, right? It's like a very small, compact version of a bigger storyline that's going to be told over several seasons later on. So, again, it was yellow, something yellow, that helped him escape. So yellow has always been, we've kind of known that since Coda, really, the color of escaping death. So Daryl and Carol arrive in this yellow car, which suggests that something's going to happen that could be deadly, but they're going to escape it. And that in and of itself isn't shocking. Like, nobody was expecting Daryl and Carol to die in this episode. But we can also very much relate this color back to Beth. So they head into the Maison Mare, and they both have these kind of sarcastic lines, like, she clearly doesn't want to be there. She had bad experiences at the Maison Mare, and he's like, "Are you okay?" And she says, "Yeah, I'm just thrilled to be back." And he's like, "Yeah, good times." I just thought it was funny that they're both being kind of snippy about, not to each other, but just in general about it. And this is kind of, they cut back and forth between Daryl and Carol here, and then what's going on in the community with Losang. So actually, Falou's people do a pretty good job of lying and saying that Laurent is not there, but then unfortunately Losang catches a glimpse of his Rubik's Cube, which was left on the table, so he knows he's there. Then we go back to Daryl and Carol searching. We see a dog eating, grossly, eating some human remains. And the interesting thing is that Carol steps into another room. They split up just slightly, going into different directions. And so the dog is only seen, really, with Daryl. And that is also another serious reference. We've got a dog reference. He doesn't really interact with the dog other than telling it to go away and to stop that, and then the dog goes away. So it's not like a big part of the episode or anything, but it does look a little bit like his dog that's back at Alexandria. So anyway, it's just more of the serious symbolism. Carol finds a lighter that works, and then she finds Daryl's recording that we heard a lot in season 1, where he talked about trying to get back home. So I thought that was interesting that she got to hear that. Then Daryl says he found something, and he takes her into the room where Janae was doing a lot of the experiments, because there's a whole bunch of walkers penned up in there. So he tells her to look through them and see if she sees Ash, but she says no, he's not here. Then here we get the part that made me realize that this was a consumed replay. They look out the window, and they're kind of up high, and they see down into the courtyard is a van that has walkers surrounding it. And Daryl says something like, there's got to be something alive in there, or the walkers wouldn't be doing that. But this was very, very similar. Even the shot of them looking out the window, very, very similar to the shot of them in Consumed, when they look out the window and see the van with the cross in it. Okay, so I'm going to go on just a tiny bit of a tangent here. If you think about it then, there was basically 2 searches that went on in this episode, and the first one, of course, is them searching for Ash. Ash is most definitely a Beth proxy. Remember I said he got into the van, it's surrounded by walkers, he gets hit in the head, and we have this cut on his head in the exact same place Beth got shot. So clearly he's a Beth proxy. And the first search is Daryl and Carol searching for Ash, just the same as Daryl and Carol were searching for Beth in Consumed, which was 506. We have this thing where they look out the window, and we see, I mean, in both cases they're vans, but one of them is more of an SUV van. The other one was like one of those big white 15-passenger things. The part in Consumed where they go to the bridge and go to the van, and of course there's nobody in it, but that's how they get the idea for Grady Memorial Hospital, because it's a Grady Memorial Hospital van. Then a bunch of walkers come and they end up jumping in, and then of course they get in the van and it goes off the side of the bridge, right? There's a part there that I always felt like it's very nebulous and it's very weird, and it was hard to interpret because of that, but I always thought it was a Beth thing, because there's a part, you have to go back and watch it in Consumed, where they're fighting walkers. First they try to fight through it, but it just doesn't work. There's too many of them, and then they get into the van, right? When they're fighting through the walkers, or trying to, there's a part where it's only showing the walkers, and more than that, it's showing like the walkers' feet. It's not really showing their faces. And you can hear Daryl and Carol talking to each other. I don't remember what they say, but she's just going, look out, there's too many of them. What should we do? You know, I mean, you can just kind of hear them talking as they're fighting. And there's one part where it shows a walker that seems to have fallen down. It's laying horizontally on the ground, and all the other walkers are just kind of walking around it, and you can't see its face. It's like there's a walker standing in front of it, so you only see it from the neck down. But I want to say that you can see a little bit of blonde hair. And then after that, they jump into the van, and we go to them being inside the van. Daryl and Carol, I mean. And that was always really weird to me. I was going, I feel like there's a blonde walker that's lying on the ground, and the camera is focusing on it, but we don't see its face. What the freak is going on? Why are they including that shot? The thing that it reminded me of is, okay, we're going to jump back even further to season 4. When, after the prison went down in 4B, we had that sequence with the school bus where Maggie and Sasha and Bob were letting walkers out of the school bus and putting them down, and it was because Maggie was looking for Glenn and was worried he was on the bus. And there is a walker that jumps off the bus and falls down, and then Maggie, I think, stabs it in the head, and it is a blonde female walker that is very much like a Beth resemblance walker. And it shows something very similar. It shows the walker laying on the ground, and then you see Maggie stab it in the head. And so, again, this was years ago that I was trying to connect these two things, and I felt like that walker that we see, even though we don't see its face, the walker that we see in Consumed, and the walker that was blonde that was lying by the bus that Maggie killed, that they were similar shots, like they just looked similar. The main difference being that the one in Consumed, we couldn't see its face. And so I was going, well, this has got to be a Beth thing. I mean, I can't imagine it's anything else, but I just wasn't sure exactly how to interpret it, because especially the one in Consumed is very weird and very subtle. But at the same time, I feel like the camera's focusing on it for like 5 seconds. I mean, it's there, and it's like they only have so much airtime. Every single shot they put into the show is intentional. And anyway, beyond my own suspicions that something was going on there, and they were trying to do Beth symbolism in some way, I mean, I didn't really have anything else, right? But to me, seeing this sequence, and not only just them looking out the window, but what I'm going to go into next, the whole Ash, them in the van sequence, kind of confirms that for me, okay? I still don't know exactly what they were thinking of when they did that in Consumed, or what they were going for, other than maybe to show that that it's all Beth symbolism, that they're telling us maybe what happened during those missing 17 days, something like that. The blonde walker lying on the ground could just be indicative of Beth getting shot and lying on the ground at Grady. The fact that we didn't see the walker's face in Consumed, you know, it didn't show her face again after she was shot. And that was something we all noticed and made a big deal of at the time. And then we have this sequence, okay? So we're having kind of a replay of the sequence from Consumed. So I just wanted to say that, like, there were things that I was connecting going, yeah, I knew that symbolism. I've always known that symbolism was about Beth, and this kind of confirms it because we're seeing it again. And now the way that they're doing this and the symbolism being about Beth is much more clear than it was to me back in season 5. So I'm going to move forward now, and I'll talk about it as I go. So outside the car, Daryl and Carol fight walkers. And in this part, they're going back and forth, too. We have this speech from Lo saying to Falou, talking about how he doesn't want Daryl to take Laurent, and if he does, then where will that leave them, and that the people are losing faith and they need proof. And Falou says something pretty cool. He says, you're kind of missing the point, dude. If you need proof, you've already lost your faith. And I thought that was a really cool line, especially because Lo saying he still believes he has his faith, and it's like he's blinded himself to the fact that he's actually really abandoned his faith. And I mean, like, he says he has that, and I'm sure he still believes things and everything, but if he really had faith, he wouldn't be trying to bite Laurent or get Laurent bitten by a walker. So, again, it was a cool line. And Vouloir manages to create a diversion by taking somebody hostage for a minute so that Caudron and Laurent can escape. Then we finally get Daryl and Carol making it into the van where Ash is. And they're completely surrounded. They don't know what they're going to do, but in the back of the van, Daryl does find some of the syringes full of the serum. And I wasn't sure exactly what they were going for here. It took me a minute to get it, but he basically shoots 2 walkers with it. And I didn't really understand why the rest seemed to be blowing up. But really, it was just that the super walkers were tearing all of the other walkers apart. And then the 2 super walkers, like, break the windows and try to get into the van, but at least there's only 2 of them, and they managed to kill them. So that was actually a really smart plan, and it helped them get out of it. But once again, so we have this representation of a Beth proxy who is in the front seat, who has a head injury, who has an injury on the top left of the forehead, exactly where she was shot. And he, Ash is in there, but he's hurt. And then they're surrounded by walkers. So this is a callback to a little bit to Daryl and Beth being in the trunk in Still, being surrounded by walkers. It's also a callback to Daryl and Aaron being in the minivan when they accidentally triggered the wolf trap at the end of season 5. And Morgan came and got them there. So there's that pesky Morgan reference again. That's part of the fact that Morgan saved them in that case is another one of the reasons why a lot of us have thought that maybe Morgan found Beth in the car and took her back to Grady or something. I mean, we don't know that for sure, and we could be wrong and okay, but because we could all read the symbolism of the wolves, back then we knew that that was kind of Beth's symbolism there, and it was Morgan who came and helped them and got them out. So anyway, this was actually a really cool scene. I really enjoyed it. They did this really interesting thing where at one point they had the camera pan all the way around to the inside of the van. So it started on Daryl, and then it panned over the front seat where Ash and Carol were, and then it panned over the side, and then it panned over the back, and then it came back to Daryl in a full circle like that. And I thought that was interesting, and it was a cool way to show it. You have this like blood exploding all over the windows, which is gross, but it was like a really tense scene, and I really liked the scene. I thought it was really fun. Anyway, it does work. They all get out of the van. Ash asks about Sophia, but Carol still doesn't tell him the truth yet. And the other thing that this reminds us of is that there's bodies all over the ground because of all these walkers that were just killed, and it looks just like Rick's hallucination from 905 when he's talking to Sasha, ghost Sasha, who's speaking to him, and there's bodies everywhere, and we can see Beth laying there. That's what it looks like. W.D. Way said she looked for a Beth lookalike in this crowd and didn't see one. But, I mean, these are mostly Janae's people. A lot of them are recently killed, so it's kind of not surprising we wouldn't necessarily see a Beth lookalike. I mean, maybe we could have seen a blonde or something, but that would be it. But anyway, feels like a callback to Rick a little bit. And remember that he, too, disappeared, went into the CRM, and everybody pretty much considered him dead. And then Michonne found him, and they returned together. So let's just call it more resurrection symbolism, and a callback to something where we saw Beth, a representation of Beth in Rick's hallucination, and that was super suspicious. So, yeah. They do get back to the racetrack, and Daryl bugs Carol again about her lie about Sophia. And he asks, why did you lie about that specifically? And she says, I made up something I wished was true. And also he'd lost his son. And so Daryl goes, oh, okay, well, I guess I understand. But I thought it was interesting that she said she made up something she wished was true, because while we haven't, seen Daryl lie about Beth necessarily in the same way that Carol has lied to someone about Sophia being alive, a lot of us talked about him creating the image of his life with Isabel as being the life he wanted with Beth. And it's, even she called it a dream. It sounds like a dream. It's something that he made up that he wanted to be true. And it didn't work out, certainly with Isabel, but probably because he wanted that with Beth. You know what I mean? It'll work out with her. But anyway, it was just interesting. I thought it was a really interesting way to put it, that Carol, and that Carol admitted that, you know, I made up something that I wished was true. And it goes back to not accepting what's happened and not living in the present, you know, everything we've talked about. So he tells her to get Ash ready to fly, and he's going to go look for fuel, for ethanol. So I told you there were 2 searches. The first one was obviously for Ash, and Ash was a very big Beth proxy during that search. This is the second one, and this is almost an indirect search because he goes looking for ethanol. Technically, he's searching for ethanol, but he finds Laurent. He doesn't know at this point that Lausanne attacked the community and that Caudron and Laurent had to make a run for it. And the reason this is interesting, I mean, first of all, ethanol is a Beth symbol, right? We have the alcohol, we have the gas symbol. It's always been a Beth symbol, so you could say that symbolically it's him searching for Beth. Then he finds Laurent. So more than one way I could take this. Number one, I almost want to say that this is a representation of the Daryl Dixon spinoff in general, even though he wasn't looking for ethanol in you know, specifically. We always said, if, you know, from the very beginning, because we heard Judith's voiceover saying you deserve a happy ending. In a way, whether Daryl was conscious of it or not, this was kind of always his search for Beth, or his search for his romantic soulmate. And because ethanol is a Beth symbol, you see what I mean? Like, him searching for ethanol could represent this journey he goes on, the search he goes on from the beginning of season 1. And then who does he find? He finds Laurent, right? And that's what happened in the Daryl Dixon spinoff. But that doesn't mean just because he found Laurent that he didn't find the ethanol. He did. And then, you know, eventually took it back to the plane so they could return home. And then we have the home symbolism. Another way we could look at it is that I've said more than once that because he doesn't think Beth is alive, at least not yet, I mean, obviously at some point he'll realize that, I feel like it's going to be like season 5, where Daryl and Carol are searching for her, but maybe they won't realize they're searching for her. Maybe they're going to be looking for something else and run into her. And, you know, we've been back and forth about that a lot, but this kind of suggests that, because he's looking for ethanol and then he finds something he didn't expect, which was Laurent. And obviously he knew Laurent was alive, but he didn't know that Laurent had left the community, and he didn't know that Laurent would be there at the club when he went back to the club to ask for ethanol. So it kind of fits a lot of the symbolism we've seen and a lot of the theories that we've had. We do know, in terms of season 3, you know, what they've told us is that Daryl and Carol are going to be looking for a way home, and they're going to, I think, hop on a boat, but then it ends up in Spain rather than taking them all the way back to the States. So that would be, you can see how that kind of lines up with that. There, you know, the ethanol is to fuel the plane, which is a means of transportation so they can get home. Daryl and Carol are going to hop on a boat, which is a means of transportation so they can get home, but then they're going to end up in a different place, and I'm thinking they're going to end up running into somebody that they didn't expect, meaning Beth. So once again, the ethanol represents Beth, but Laurent is also a really big proxy for Beth here. So he finds Caudron and Laurent, and they tell Daryl about Lausanne, and Anna says that she will give them the fuel. Anna's kind of an interesting character. I don't think we're going to see too much more of her either, but she acts like a villain, and she seems to kind of have taken over as the madam of the club, and she raided Janae's stash once Janae died. But at the same time, she's nice to them and helps them, and seems to have a soft spot for Laurent. So she's kind of a funny, interesting character. All right, so then we go back to the plane, Carol and Ash, and Ash says something interesting. He says, you know, again, just in terms of Carol's internal arc, he says it's easy for us to blame ourselves. And then he says that the trip with her helped him get past the guilt over his son's death. And you can tell that really, really surprises her. And it's almost like she considers not telling him the truth at that point, because obviously this trip was helpful to him. And I just thought that was interesting. Going on a journey and helping someone can actually help you to get past things. And maybe that's also showing what this trip is going to do for Daryl and Carol. It's going to help them finally get past their demons, which is what I've been saying for a while. Then we go back to the club, and Laurent once again says he doesn't want to go with Daryl, but Daryl's bugs him about it and says, no, what's really going on? You got to tell me why don't you want to come? Why not? And he finally admits that it's because he doesn't want Daryl to die, because everyone who's around him, everyone who tries to protect him ends up dying. And of course, then Daryl understands where this is coming from. So clearly Laurent does want to go with him, but he has said he won't because he's like thinking in his mind that he's protecting Daryl. Daryl starts to say that that's not his fault and it has nothing to do with him, but they don't get very far in that conversation because then Lo Sang shows up at the club. And Anna helps hide them. They go out this door into the catacombs from her office. And then we have everybody running around in these dark passages. So I won't go too much into the dark passage symbolism other than to say it's the dark tunnel symbolism, right? They're running around in there. We did see the symbolism in season 4 and season 5. We saw it around Beth. And here, once again, Laurent becomes very much a Beth proxy. So they're not entirely sure which way to go to get out. So Daryl and Caudron split up. And of course, Laurent goes with Daryl, and Lo Sang and his people then split up and follow both of them. Okay, so here's the next really big sequence that is clearly a replay of Beth, right? Daryl puts Laurent into this little structure, and at first I couldn't tell what it was. I was just thinking it was this little house or something. It almost looked like a little dog house or something. But I had to go back and get a better look at it after I watched the episode. And the biggest thing is I thought it was yellow, but this whole scene is done in darkness, so I couldn't tell right away. So I took some screenshots, and then when I messed with the saturation, it's definitely yellow. But I was looking at the plaque on it, trying to figure out what it said, and I took high school French about 1 billion years ago, and I'm not good at it anymore. But what I did recognize that it says is that it's got a name, I believe, and then it says de, and it has another what looks like a name. So it's got the name of the person, and the de usually means where they're from. So it's like this person from this place, and then it has a date. And I went, oh, of course, these are the catacombs. There's bodies down here. This is a mausoleum, okay? This is a burial plaque. He literally puts Laurent into a yellow grave. You really can't get more on the nose about the symbolism than that, okay? Once I realized that, I was just like laughing, going, okay, they're really laying it on thick here, okay? But we like that. We're grateful that they're laying it on thick so that we can see it. Okay, so he puts Laurent in this little mausoleum, right, and says, stay here till I come back. And Laurent says, what if you don't come back? And Daryl says, when has that ever happened? I will always come back for you. Oh, I don't even know exactly where to go with that in terms of Beth, but it's clearly about the missing 17 days, putting her somewhere, and he was going to come back for her, but of course she's not there when he comes back. But it's also kind of heartbreaking to think of it in that way. I mean, obviously, because he thought she was dead and she was not conscious, she wouldn't have said, what if you don't come back for me? But maybe, something he was thinking, I'll come back for you, I'll come back and get you. And it's just like, it's really kind of heartbreaking to think about. But it also, because Laurent is a Beth proxy, in a way it kind of might inform Beth's side of things, that she woke up and no one was there and she assumed nobody was coming back, because I mean, it's kind of like, why would she assume that? Because, sorry, I said that wrong. Why wouldn't she assume that? Because if she knows that they thought she was dead, then she's like, well, of course they're not coming back. They think I'm dead. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of interesting the way that they're putting all of this together. And it's once again making me very, very curious to find out what happened specifically during those missing 17 days. So then we have the fight, right? I mean, he leaves Laurent there. He ends up fighting Lo Sang. I absolutely loved, actually, this showdown. I thought it was super cool. We have Daryl step out of the shadows, and then you just kind of see the morning star fall, and I thought that was really cool. And I really liked their fight. I thought it was fun. At one point, he grabs a skull and basically uses it to bash Lo Sang's head in, right? But that reminded me of Coda. Remember when he's fighting one of the officers, I want to say it's Lucaria that he was fighting with, and Rick comes back to help him because things aren't going well. Lucaria's a big guy. But remember, Daryl grabs the walker head through the eyes and rips off its head and uses it to bash Lucari. That's what this reminded me of. I think they were calling back to that. In this case, it's not a walker. It's not alive. It's not trying to bite him. But it is a skull. And then interestingly, they, after Lo Sang is dead, they sort of pan down and you can see a skull there with blood all over it. And I'm not even sure what they were trying to do with that necessarily. I was thinking maybe, I'm kind of assuming that that's maybe what Daryl used to bash his head in, right? And so maybe the fact that they're zeroing in on it, maybe to kind of drive home the Coda reference. I also thought that maybe we would see like a hole in the skull in some way, so that we would kind of, like maybe something that we could equate to Beth. And I'm not sure that's really what it's meant to be. I mean, there's not like an obvious hole in the forehead of the skull or anything like that. It does look to be pretty broken up. You can see pieces of it that are lying behind it, including the lower jawbone, and there's blood all over it. So I'm not sure exactly where they're going with that. I was thinking that with the jaw being broken off, it could be the speak no evil thing. And Lo Sang especially was very much twisting his own words to his people. He was talking about faith, but it was becoming a very twisted kind of faith. So maybe it was about silencing the person who was speaking evil. I don't know. It was just kind of an interesting detail that they zeroed in on that skull. Would love to hear other people's interpretations, by the way. A couple of other details from his fight with Lo Sang. At one point, Daryl is thrown into an altar that has a cross on it, and it gets knocked down. And I felt like that was purposeful. Like it has to do with his sort of fight with his own faith in a lot of ways. I did think a little bit more, and I've kind of said this before, but maybe not quite this way. Lo Sang has a scar on his cheek that looks a lot like Beth's scar, but it's on the opposite cheek. And I was thinking when I was watching this episode that maybe they did that purposefully because she was a person of faith, but the fact that it's on the opposite cheek from her shows that he's sort of like a bad religious leader or a negative, because he is twisting things like that. Just kind of a random thought that I had. I think that's most of what I had from the fight. So then, of course, he goes back and gets Laurent. And, we could almost see that, too, because you could, if you were arguing this, which I know none of you are, but you could argue that, he went back and got Laurent, and Laurent was there waiting for him and all of that, whereas we don't think that's what happened with Beth, so it's different. But back to, like, what W.D. Way said about the shoes, maybe that just shows that the person he went back for who was gone, that they're going to be reunited again soon, because we're seeing a replay, but some different things are happening. He is actually finding Laurent. There are actually reunions between him and Laurent and so on, Okay, so then they meet back up with Caudron, and they all head out together. And then so there was a whole other battle, I guess I didn't really talk about, between Caudron and Lo Sang's right-hand woman, Jacinta, I think is her name. Hopefully I'm getting that right. And Caudron throws her into a wall, and she passes out. I don't know that he necessarily thought she was dead. It just doesn't seem to me like that would have been enough to kill her. And he's somebody who has killed a lot of people. He's a soldier. He's very acquainted with death. So I don't think he really thought she was dead. He just took her out of commission and then left. He didn't really care to kill her. But the interesting thing is at the end, we see her laying on the ground and her eyes open. So that felt very purposeful. We have someone who was maybe sort of at least symbolically left for dead, who then wakes up. Felt like the wake up theme for Beth. So she's still around, and you kind of got to wonder if she's going to carry on Lo Sang's twisted work, because honestly, she was somebody who, even though she was sort of the secondary antagonist to Lo Sang, she was whispering in his ear a lot. And he, you kind of have to wonder if maybe he wouldn't have gotten so off the rails if not for her. So I'm kind of wondering what they'll do with her, if we'll see her again. All right, so then we go back to Carol and Ash at the, it's not a hangar, at the racetrack. And she finally does come clean and tell him that she lied. That she was looking for Daryl. She tells him Sophia died 12 years ago. And then we get some more interesting things, again, with her admitting about, the internal stuff that's going on. She says, it's like I never let her go because I never forgave myself. Now, clearly we don't want Daryl to let Beth go, but at the same time, it's not really about her as a person. It's about the regret, right? And that's what Carol's saying here. I kind of missed it, but when she was talking to Daryl about, telling him that she lied about Sophia at an earlier point, she said at one point, she goes, I don't even know where it came from. But then she said, I made up something, that I wanted to be true. And she said a couple of other things. And then she said, okay, I guess maybe I do know where it came from. And so that too is just, paying attention to the nuances like that is, by talking through it that way, she's realizing where it's coming from. Like, she didn't even realize that before, right? And so now she's telling him, Ash, this, it's like, I never let her go because I never forgave myself. And she says, I think you get that. We share that feeling. So it was kind of the same as him. He, when she found him, he was very stuck. I mean, he was physically stuck. He'd never left this place where his son died. And none of that is wrong by any means in and of itself. He had this, you know, memorial to his son that he could visit, and it's what made him feel better, and it's what got him through. But at some point, you kind of need to move on with life, right? And he wasn't doing that. And that's very much where Daryl and Carol are. They have not moved on from these things because they have such heavy regret, because they never forgave themselves for what happened. So they're being very verbal and very on the nose about what these internal themes are. And I love that about this, because it's really giving us a good idea of what the problems have been. You know, we've always talked about how for many, many seasons now, Daryl has been depressed and just kind of surly and not saying much. And now this is telling us why and what's been going on beneath the surface this whole time with both him and Carol. Now, of course, Ash gets very angry and very upset, totally understandably. Oh, the other thing she says, so she says, I know we share that feeling. And then she says, that feeling's been getting worse lately. So just kind of what I've always said about their internal arc, it's all come to a head. Things were too quiet at Alexandria, and that feeling, especially the feeling of her regrets, her demons coming up, she didn't want to deal with them, so she left to look for Daryl. But this trip, meeting Ash, everything that's happened, seeing Daryl having this attachment to Laurent, all of it is actually helping her work through her demons, just like helping her helped Ash work through his demons. And then, you know, we've got Daryl hopefully gonna... We haven't seen him do it as much yet. I mean, I think Laurent is helping him a lot, but we definitely, for anyone who's seen spoilers, we're going to see a lot more of this specifically for Daryl in the next episode. Right now, he's still kind of grieving for Isabel, and he hasn't worked through a whole lot. But again, this is going to end up being... Ash has a line here that says something like, well, I hope your therapy's working. And he's being sarcastic. He's really angry that Carol manipulated him. But that in and of itself, that line is kind of a hint that this whole excursion for both Daryl and Carol is therapy to help them with their internal issues. They finally make it out. Daryl and Caudron, and Anna meets them. Daryl and Caudron are buddies now. Like I said, I totally wish that we could see more of Caudron, though I don't know that we will. I mean, he'll probably be in episode 6, but I don't think he'll be in it beyond season 2. So then Daryl talks to Laurent again and finally convinces him to come with him, and Laurent's super happy. And then we have a really on-the-nose Beth line. Daryl says, good, go get your shit, which is something he told Beth as they were running out of the funeral home and alone. And then they head back. So then when they get there, and, you know, I was thinking this several times, it's a really small plane, and they also have to carry all of their fuel. And I was going, are they sure that that there's going to be enough room for all 4 of them and the fuel? And yeah, sure enough, Ash is like, nope. This plane is not getting off the ground with that many of us. So, you know, we have a problem. And then that's the end of the episode. Hey, look at that. I managed to keep it just under an hour, it looks like. The episode Insider didn't have a whole lot. It, or at least not anything really in terms of a hint or anything. So I don't have a whole lot to talk about from that. They did talk about shooting the scene in the van and how everybody just had tons of fun. There was one part where Nicotero was excited about tearing Walker's limb from limb, and he made this funny little motion with his fingers that just, he was super excited, you know. All the gore, and Nicotero's in his element, and I thought that was funny. But it was interesting that they focused on that scene and how much fun they all had shooting it. Oh, one other note I have here is that, and I actually thought of this, I think, while I was watching The Insider rather than while I was watching the episode, and that's why it's here, is that, remember it was probably episode 1, when Daryl went in to talk to Lo-Sang, and Lo-Sang was practicing his Aikido, and he asked Daryl if he wanted to fight him and, like, have a little duel, and Daryl was like, no, I'm good. That was a foreshadow that they would eventually fight. So that's just another little connection to make. Anyway, so, okay, I think I'm going to stop there so that I'm not going any longer this week. I will try to get 1 or 2 more videos out with asks in them. And yeah, so let me know what you guys thought. Let me know if I missed anything. I probably did, because, you know, there's a lot. But I really, really enjoyed this episode. It was super fun to watch. It was super fun to interpret. And I really liked seeing all of the replays. Oh, I was going to say one other thing about it being a consumed replay. It had some obvious sequences that were replays of consumed. We keep saying that consumed, like the whole season would be a consumed replay because it's Daryl and Carol together leading up to finding Beth. But we also know now that she's probably not going to be in this season unless they drop like a coda or something that the previewers haven't seen. So overall, I mean, in terms of the season, it might be more season 3 that is a replay of consumed. I mean, you could still say that since they came back together, Daryl and Carol, from then on, because they're together, it's going to be one great big replay of consumed until they actually find Beth. But anyway, I just kind of wanted to say that overall, it wasn't as much of a replay of consumed, the season as a whole, as I would have thought, just because, for one thing, it took so long for Daryl and Carol to actually come back together. It was just last episode that they reunited. So the true consumed replays couldn't really begin until after that. And what do you know, the very next episode, this episode, we have quite a few of them that are very on the nose. So that's exciting to see. And yeah, just once again, we're on track to them eventually finding Beth. We're just kind of sitting here waiting for it, you know? So I hope you all like the episode, and I will be back soon. And yeah, talk to you later.